What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be discussing week 2. We will be talking about players that you can pick up on the waiver wire, players that you should consider trading for on your team, as well as players to drop and players to sell high on. I will be going through all those at every position in today's video. The purpose of this video is to take the information that we have here from week 1 and make the best informed opinions to help you win your fantasy football championships with some moves that you can make here after this first week of action. If you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. I make a wide variety of fantasy football content as well as other stuff that you can check out in the description below. So, week 1 is now in the books. This was kind of a crazy week 1. There were a lot of outcomes. Certain players did very well, other players did poorly. But the biggest takeaway here, there are certain stats to focus on besides just the raw point total that are very beneficial to look at going into the following weeks here in fantasy football. The key thing, if you didn't start out well this week, know that it is a long season and there's a lot of opportunity to turn things around. And a lot of the moves you make are not actually won at the draft, but later on during the season. Smart moves on the waiver wire, trade candidates, etc. So I'll talk about all of that. And my biggest message to you, though, is if it wasn't a good week, just be patient because things will work out. A lot of players did not play well this week. It's just kind of a lot of the teams settling into their offenses, but things I believe will be a lot better for some of these particular players moving forward. So we will get right into it. We will talk the quarterbacks. I will be talking first the quarterbacks that I want to pick up. Then I'm talking about the ones to drop, players you may want to hold, as well as trade for and trade away candidates at each and every position. So first we will be starting among the guys that are probably rostered but might be out there. Do check if Justin Fields is available. He had a great fantasy game today. He was all over the field, no pun intended. And this guy he's now being utilized in this New York Jets system to use his legs as well. He doesn't have any competition behind him. He ran for 2 touchdowns today. Tyrod Taylor is his backup. Actually had a pretty good completion percentage as well. Justin Fields, if he is out there, he is a must-roster player. I would be trying to get him on my team. If you cannot get Justin Fields, though, the next best to me is Daniel Jones. And the reason being is that Daniel Jones, much like Justin Fields, is a very mobile quarterback. And as a result, that rushing baseline for both these players turned out very well today. They both ran for 2 touchdowns. Daniel Jones as well had 272 yards in the air. So a great performance from him. These are the 2 players that I would be trying to roster on your teams, both Daniel Jones and Justin Fields personally. If you cannot get them, there are some other good options though. Michael Penix, kind of got off a little slow in this game, but I do really like him as an NFL prospect. I think that he's going to continue to get better, and I think that once he gets settled in and he gets a little more familiar with the NFL offenses, I think things will really pop for him as the season goes along. One of the better players that you can get out there on waivers, who I believe is only about 20% rostered. So because of that, he is somebody that he's exactly 20% rostered in ESPN. This is a guy that I think would be a great backup quarterback to have, and in super flex leagues would be somebody I would be trying to start as well out there. Next for me would be Geno Smith. Again, great performance through the air. He had almost 375 passing yards today. Very effective in that regards. He also threw for a touchdown. You don't love the interceptions, but still he is looking pretty good here in Pete Carroll's offensive scheme now with Chip Kelly there. Really like Geno Smith as a potential option that you can grab off the bench too. And then other ones as well, Aaron Rodgers. I'm not as high on his performance because I do think there is somewhat of a ceiling of effect of what he can actually provide on a week-by-week basis consistently. I will talk about him in another segment shortly in that regards. And then Trevor Lawrence, a little bit disappointing as the stream of the week this week, but he does get the Cincinnati Bengals next week, and I think if Joe Flacco can be serviceable in that game, which he was, then Trevor Lawrence can be as well. He was out of sync with a lot of his targets today, like Brian Thomas Jr. in particular, but I do think that the Jags have a chance of riding the ship against the Cincinnati defense, which is definitely beatable. And then in deeper leagues, a situation to monitor. Brian Daboll did not officially name a starting quarterback for next week for the New York Giants. So I would just, if you're in the deepest of leagues, 2 quarterback especially, consider rostering Jaxson Dart at this time before he is announced as the starter, because there is a lot of potential there. This Giants team is not necessarily the best offensively, but with Malik Neighbors, I think he can elevate the floor of a rookie quarterback, and Jaxson Dart could give you some good hypothetical upside here. Who do you want to drop, though? It's a little difficult to choose which quarterback to drop of the ones that are heavily rostered, because most of them had pretty good games. I will say that the ones that are on the fringe that you may want to consider dropping in single quarterback leagues are Drake Maye and CJ Stroud. So that's a little bit controversial, but I'll talk Drake Maye first. The reason I would potentially consider that is, going up against the Raiders, this isn't necessarily a great defense. They do get Miami next week, which, hopefully that can help Drake Maye's value, but then they get Pittsburgh the following week. And I think that, if you're really in a pinch and if you're trying to choose between Drake Maye or Justin Fields, Daniel Jones, I would probably go with either of those two because you have a little bit more mobility there. But Drake Maye is somebody that could be on the chopping line depending on what your team needs. And then CJ Stroud, again, this is kind of if you are getting Justin Fields or Daniel Jones. CJ Stroud did not look very good today against the Rams, and I know that they have a pretty solid defense overall, but I'm not super high on what I saw today from CJ Stroud. I would be holding Bo Nix, though. This was not a great game necessarily from Bo, but I think he will have better performances moving forward. For whatever reason, they were just not in sync in this particular game against Tennessee, which is an underrated defense, but I think the Broncos will get better as the season progresses offensively. Next week they get Indianapolis, and then they get the Chargers and then Cincinnati. So the matchups do get a little bit easier as the season progresses over this first month, and I think that he will be serviceable again. This will not be the last time I talk about him. So who do you trade for among the quarterbacks? The number one that I'm looking at is Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow had a pretty poor game. They were out of sync offensively throughout that game, and the Browns shut them out. Now, if you're going to try to get him, you're going to have to give up a lot to get Joe Burrow, but potentially a manager may be swayed if they have Justin Fields to try to part from Joe Burrow, for example. So because of that, would probably be the best time to try to get Joe Burrow if you can, and I think that you actually may have a chance based on how his week 1 performance was this year. If you are going to try to swing for that bait, you got to do that now, in my opinion, after week 1. Bo Nix is also a good trade candidate to me. I do not see continued performances like this moving forward, like what he just showed today in week 1. I think he will get better, and against Cincy in week 4, I think that will be a true opportunity for him to pop off and give you a much better performance. Now, in the deeper leagues where you are going to some deeper options at quarterback, Jared Goff is a buy low candidate to me. Much like Nix and Burrow, I believe that offense will be better moving forward. Played a pretty underrated defense today in Green Bay. Dak Prescott, same thing. And then Jordan Love himself. I think Jordan Love, kind of sneaky underrated in terms of the value that he can give you potentially in a 2-quarterback league. In this particular game, they were ahead and they didn't need to necessarily utilize Jordan Love's passing ability a lot. But I think in games where you'll see more competitive competition later on, and Green Bay has a lot of that, they will be in a situation where he will be needed to throw the ball downfield more and will give you a more a better fantasy stat line than what he gave you today, basically. The sell candidates. I bring up Justin Fields and Daniel Jones again because they were 2 of the top 3 quarterbacks for this week, and I do not have them ranked anywhere near my top 5. So because of that, I think if you're going to try to go fishing for the elite quarterbacks, or even if you have them as a secondary quarterback on your team and you're trying to get a flex, I think this would be the best time to try to do that in week 1 here. Aaron Rodgers, again, like I said, I just don't see this performance consistently lasting week to week. I think this is a good opportunity to try to sell Aaron Rodgers. And then Kyler Murray, another one. I don't love this one necessarily, but he is a name. He did give you an okay stat line today, and you like the fact that he did rush the ball 7 times for 38 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, 163 yards in the air. Was kind of hoping for a little bit more, though, against the Saints, because it's not a great team necessarily. I think you can, if depending on what your other quarterback options are, Murray is a name that could potentially get you one of the bigger names that I like a little bit more than him. I still like Kyler Murray. To me, he is a top 10 quarterback in fantasy, but I think this is an opportunity to maybe try to shoot for those elite players like a Burrow, for example. And my last one is Matt Stafford. This is the 2-quarterback league type of trade candidate to me. He played pretty well today, but with the back injury and all, I think this is an opportunity that you could try to acquire some quarterbacks with a little bit more upside, in my opinion. Like, for example, Trevor Lawrence, like CJ Stroud. Those are in the formats where you could be trying to go for guys that will be serviceable week in, week out starters. I think that Matt Stafford, this is a good opportunity to try to sell him before the injury either worsens or before he has games that could lower his stat line in particular. Okay, running backs. So this is kind of a weak, pretty poor week on the, I was going to say week, but that was like not going to work out for me. This is a pretty slow week on the running back waiver wire. There are really 3 names that I want to mention here, but other than that, I think the biggest priority for picking up running backs is to get the handcuff of your elite guy, because there were not a whole lot of breakout candidates that really stood out. The biggest one, though, was, before I get to him, check to see if Zach Charbonnet is available. He's about 70% rostered in ESPN leagues. He is the one, to me, that has the best chance of truly breaking out in this situation and becoming the lead back in Seattle. He got the touchdown today. He had more carries than Kenneth Walker. I think this is eventually going to be Charbonnet's backfield moving forward, and the fact that it's already a 50-50 split is pretty concerning for Kenneth Walker, in my opinion. But check if Charbonnet is available. But the guy that I said in this channel would be my top pickup among the under 40% roster running backs in the start of the week at the running back position, Dylan Sampson, came through today with a great performance, especially in PPR, where he had 8 catches today. Dylan Sampson was a top 10 running back on the week, believe it or not. He did not do much on the ground, but he did have 12 carries, 29 yards, 8 for 64 on 8 targets. So this is pretty good if you're just looking for somebody that is going to be PPR relevant and the Browns need a running back to step up while Judkins is still out. This is your guy. He's really the best option that you can get on waivers that I think you could play in week 2, but I don't know what it's going to look like moving forward with Judkins. Still, Dylan Sampson should be rostered in all formats because he is heavily utilized already by Joe Flacco as a check down option, and I think that will give you pretty consistent value moving forward. So because of that, I think Dylan Sampson is somebody that, let's say Judkins gets suspended, then this is a situation where this guy could be the starter for multiple weeks even. So I really like Dylan Sampson as really the best waiver wire option. He's not a huge fab dump necessarily, but he is somebody that I think that I would put about like 10 to 15% on and feel comfortable starting him for a few weeks until Judkins is good to go. The other names are interesting names to me, more so as handcuffs, but Trey Benson was pretty involved today as well. I think partially because they were pretty handily ahead in that game, but also James Conner did not look particularly effective in that. He was a little inefficient today. They may involve Benson more, so I separate him from the rest of the handcuffs in that regards because I think that Trey Benson could actually get a little bit more involved as we see the season progress, and is worth a stash that probably does not cost anywhere nearly as much as Sampson. You could probably honestly put a $0 bid on him and get him. And then a deep name to monitor, because Tony Pollard did not look great with almost the full load today, is Tajay Spears. He would be an IR stash for the first month of the season, but it's worth stashing him and seeing how this situation develops, because I do feel that Spears, as long as he comes back healthy, has a great opportunity in the second half of the season to really be the lead running back on this team. And this takes me to the handcuffs. The key thing is that you got to get your elite handcuff for these running backs that you have as your elite RB1 on your team. I'm just going to name a few here that I really like. Will Shipley of the Philadelphia Eagles, Brian Robinson of the San Francisco 49ers, Keaton Mitchell I think would be the most likely handcuff for Derrick Henry. You have Ray Davis for James Cook, and Tyler Algier for the Atlanta Falcons. So what I just named there are the running backs that are pretty consensus top 5 running backs in the at least from week 1. There are some other names as well that I would name, but generally I would get into that a little bit more in my running back strategy video from the offseason that you can check out as well. But I would make sure that you have the handcuff to these running backs, because we saw a lot of guys be pretty productive today, and as a result, a lot of running backs are rostered for the most part. You want to make sure you have a handcuff of your elite guys should any type of injury happen on your team. That's what I would personally recommend for your fantasy team. Who can you drop, though? That's the question. I'm going to give some names of guys that I think are essentially now the handcuff to the starting running back that I would be comfortable dropping. Rachaad White, Ramondre Stevenson, Jerome Ford, Tank Bigsby, and Najee Harris. So all those guys, there were some question marks of how much workload they would have early in the season, and they've been pretty clearly outpaced by their competition. So because of that, I think they're all droppable at this point if you do need to get the handcuff on your own team, for example. I would be holding Caleb Johnson despite the negative point performance today. I think that there is a world where he is still the lead running back on this team in the second half of the season. I would be trying to hold him, not be too dissuaded by this week 1 performance. Who do you buy at the running back position? So I'm going to split this up into 2 groups, the veterans and the rookies. The veterans I really like that you could try to buy low on. One is Chase Brown. Chase Brown didn't have an amazing stat line today necessarily. He had 13.1 points in full PPR. But what I really loved about his performance is that he had 21 carries today. The next Bengal did not have anywhere near that amount. You're seeing a guy that's getting almost 90% of the carries on this team. He's excellent for PPR as well. He only had two receptions today, but he's going to have more as the season goes along. Chase Brown to me is a top 12 running back on the season, and he's not very well known. So this is a great opportunity to try to buy him as my number 1 running back buy on the week. Number 2 is Kyren Williams. He was helped by his touchdown today, but did not have the best of performances. But Kyren Williams, though, much like I mentioned with Chase Brown, he got 18 carries today. The next running back, I believe, got 2. So because of that, this is the type of thing you want to look at with these running backs. The point total is a little bit deceiving, but look at the carries, look at the snap count, and look at the share compared to the other running backs, because both Williams and Chase Brown are pretty clearly outpacing the second running back on those teams. And then another guy I want to mention who didn't have a great stat line but is going to get involved a lot on this team is Josh Jacobs, one of the more underrated running backs on the Packers. No touchdowns today, but he is pretty clearly the lead running back there. Really like him as a great pickup for this upcoming, or as a great trade for candidate going into week 2. And then my second group are all the rookies, particularly these 4 rookies: Ashton Genty, Omarion Hampton, Travion Henderson, and RJ Harvey. So all 4 of these guys, they didn't have the best days necessarily. They kind of all hovered around 12 to 8 points. And because of that, you may be a little bit disappointed if you took these guys early, but I would implore you that this is the best time to try to buy all of them, because all 4 of them, there were questions, not really Genty, but the other 3, What would their role with the backfield look like with the other veterans there? And they all basically prove that they should be the starting running backs on this team. So people may be disappointed with Hampton, as I mentioned in the live video on Sunday. This is a great opportunity to buy him. Same with Henderson, same with Harvey. And really with Genty, because he, again, significantly outpaced the second running back, much like the veterans that I talked about that you should try to buy. All four of these rookies are great buy low candidates, and I would try to do that now because they are going to be heavily involved as the season progresses. Sell high candidates. Javonte Williams looked great, and he is the lead running back in Dallas by a pretty far margin, but I do not see a situation where he is going to have 2 touchdowns and be a 20-point fantasy performer on a week in and week out basis. The fact he's the Cowboys running back now, there's going to be a pretty high demand, and he's have some name appeal relative to how he actually will perform. So I think this is a good opportunity to try to sell him. He's a top 5 running back on the week, but still I think you can get a pretty good return for him for value that, if you drafted him in the 12th round, you got great value there. Now is your chance to try to see if you can get 5th or 6th round running back value for him. Dylan Sampson is a good sell high candidate to me because he is good in the short term, but if you're trying to play more of the long games to get somebody who could help you in the second half of the season, Judkins will probably be the lead back in Cleveland. Sampson, this is a good opportunity to try to sell him, in my opinion. Breece Hall is a sell candidate to me because of the presence of Braylon Allen, for one. We've seen some inconsistent performances from Breece Hall time to time. I think this is a good chance to try to sell him after a pretty good week 1 in which he looked solid with Justin Fields. And then James Conner. So it's amazing he got the touchdown today, because if he didn't, he would be one of the busts on this list. But he was 12 for 39. That is not a very good, that's barely over 3 yards a carry. He was 4 for 4, and he had 5 yards and a touchdown. That is pretty inefficient. And you already kind of saw Trey Benson get involved, as I said earlier. This is a good opportunity to try to sell James Conner while he got that touchdown for you. Next, we will go to our wide receivers. And there are 2 guys I really like that you can get that are widely available. But first, check to see if Keenan Allen is out there. That is the best pickup to me if he is there. But 2 guys that I like, one of them his teammates, Quentin Johnson, and then my number 1 guy, Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown, he had 16 targets in week 1 against the Chargers. And much like Dylan Sampson, as I talked about, there is kind of an expiration date of when Xavier Worthy gets healthy, because I think he will take away a lot of that opportunity that Hollywood Brown had in the opening game. But still, he holds value as a trade chip, because if you can get him, I think there's a real chance that you could flip him to somebody else and they will want to take a chance on him because he's, getting 16 targets on the Chiefs of all teams, which is a lot of people's only team that they follow in the NFL, sadly. But then talking about the Taylor Swift fans particularly, and then Quentin Johnson in the same game, 2 touchdowns. He's a great pickup as well. I do think both of these players have better value as sell candidates, though, which I will talk in a little bit. But still, these are guys that I think are good opportunities to try to pick up on waivers. More secondary options, but still good ones that I would look at that are probably $0 fab bids are Calvin Austin on the Pittsburgh Steelers. 6 targets, 4 for 70 and a touchdown. Looks like the second wide receiver in Pittsburgh. And that's important, especially if Aaron Rodgers can find a way to continue playing like he did today. But if not, just to have the target volume. Love the fact that I think 6 targets is the thing that I like the most, more so than the touchdown necessarily. Cedric Tillman, another guy, much the same thing. He had 8 targets today, 5 for 52 and a touchdown. Really like him as a good pickup as well. And then other deep considerations because of circumstances, mostly involving injuries. Ray McLeod, Drake London is banged up with a shoulder injury, but should be playing in week 2. Raymond McLeod looked pretty good in this particular game, getting a fair amount of targets. And then Rashid Shaheed with 9 targets today. Olave already getting banged up again. It's crazy how much injury prone that guy is. But Rashid Shaheed should be heavily involved moving forward, and 9 targets. Didn't have a great fantasy day, but I think he will be better as the season progresses. And then I do want to bring up Demario Douglas too. This was not a great performance by him, but he did get a touchdown, and he looks like he should be the second receiver in New England. I'm a little bit more bearish on Kayshon Boutte and what he did today. I think Demario Douglas is more of the guy that I would want to see looked at and would want to have on my roster. Who can you drop? I was wrong about this situation, but Josh Downs, rough opening day, outpaced by both Michael Pittman and Tyler Warren. Josh Downs, I think, is potentially droppable if you do have to move on and get one of these guys on the list that I've mentioned. Xavier Legette, much the same thing. He looks like he should be the second wide receiver in Carolina, but he only had 8 yards today, so extremely disappointing there. And then Rashad Bateman of the Baltimore Ravens. Yeah, I think he will have better games moving forward, but I think if you need to try to move on and get, your trade chip with Hollywood Brown, Quentin Johnson, or guys with the more expanded with a more clearly defined role as a second target on their team, like Calvin Austin or Cedric Tillman, I would probably drop Bateman for one of them. I would be holding Cooper Kupp. I know this was not a great opening game for him on the Seahawks, but he is the second receiver on that team as of right now, and I believe that he will have better games moving forward when Seattle is not playing a defense like the 49ers and don't have to focus on ball control the whole game. And then Juwan Jennings in the same game. He had an injury, didn't have a great stat line. He has a calf injury, and then now I believe he's dealing with a shoulder injury. But because this team is so devoid of targets, that's even worse now that Kittle is hurt. I would still try to be holding Jennings to see how this situation develops over the next few weeks. There are a lot of potential buy low candidates at the wide receiver position, particularly the big heavy hitter names I want to list off here: Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase. Now, those guys are going to require a haul to get, but they all had pretty poor performances in week 1, and you really want to look at with all these guys, they didn't give you huge flashy numbers, but they gave you a lot of targets, and that is not A.J. Brown, but the other guys were all pretty heavily targeted on their specific teams. That's the thing I want to look for the most. Are they getting the most targets relative to the other receivers on the team? And those guys, for the most part, did. So because of that, I'm going to be looking to try to trade for those players, but you're going to need a lot. Other smaller names that are a little bit more realistic to acquire, first to me is Tetairoa McMillan. Talking about target difference compared to his teammates, this guy had 9 targets today. It didn't really amount to a great fantasy performance necessarily, but I really like Tetairoa McMillan for what he can provide on a week in and week out basis. I think that he will be solid enough for you in fantasy and should definitely be somebody that I would be trying to target in a trade, because I do think he's going to get more acclimated. The quarterback play, I hope, will improve. If not, they'll move on to Andy Dalton again, which would be bad for Bryce for sure. But he is the clear number 1 option on that team, and it should be for the rest of the season. Brian Thomas Jr. Probably belongs in that other tier, but he had a pretty rough first game, but 7 targets, only 1 catch. I think that will get better, and they're in Cincinnati, which is a great remedy for that. And 3 other names, Calvin Ridley, Jacoby Myers, and Matthew Golden. Calvin Ridley I like as a buy low candidate because he is the number 1 option on that Tennessee Titans team, and I think that they will set him up for success. But he had a really rough first showing with a ton of drops today. It was a very poor performance from Calvin Ridley. Jacoby Myers has intrigue. One, because of the Bowers injury, which I believe is not projected to be a long-term injury, maybe just like a day-by-day type of thing. But Jacoby Myers is the number one wide receiver on that team and has a role where he'll be heavily involved now that their quarterback plays significantly better with Geno Smith. And then Matthew Golden, this is more of a deep league buy. He did not have a great game today. In fact, it was very poor. But he, I believe, will get more involved as the season progresses and is somebody that I like as a good buy low candidate to consider at the wide receiver position, in the deepest of leagues especially. Now, who can you sell high on to get those players? Now, these two names are the top two performing wide receivers on the week. It is Zay Flowers and Keon Coleman. And as much as I like them as long-term options, if you can't acquire anybody on that list that I mentioned among the elite receivers like Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, let's throw Brian Thomas Jr. in there as well, I would definitely make that trade. If you're going to get one of those receivers, you're probably going to need to give up a Coleman or a Flowers to do that because they are the top performing receivers on the week. But I would recommend taking that risk because you're getting guys that have a pedigree of longevity and success in the league that Coleman and Flowers just simply do not have. And I think if you can make that trade, I would recommend doing so. Now, who are some other sell high candidates? Hollywood Brown is a good one, as I mentioned earlier. Mostly because he part of the reason he got that much opportunity is because Xavier Worthy got injured in the middle of the game, and I don't think that's a good situation for him to have sustainability in this offense with just how rapidly their outcomes change week in and week out. I think another good sell high candidate is Deebo Samuel. You know, in a way, I think there is kind of an expiration date on his production too, because Terry McLaurin was held out of camp and for contract situations. And I do believe that when when Terry McLaurin is back and acclimated into game shape and the offense and everything, he will be the number one receiver on this team. Deebo Samuel, I think, will be a solid fantasy receiver for the season, but I think considering the fact that he finished in the top 10 for this week, I think that you can get some pretty good value for him now. I like him more in the range of maybe top 40 receiver at best. I think that this is a good opportunity to try to trade Deebo if you can. And then another name I do want to consider as well that you can try to trade for, Jaden Reed, or sell high on, is Jaden Reed. He's a guy that has been highly up and down throughout his career. He had an okay day today. I think this is a good chance to try to sell him because there is a lot of unpredictability in this Packers offense in terms of who the top receivers will be. And off a pretty solid game, I would be trying to flip Jaden Reed personally. The tight ends. So which tight ends would you want to pick up on waivers? First, check to see if Dalton Kincaid is available. He caught a touchdown today, 4 catches, gave you a top 10 tight end performance on the week. So good on Dalton Kincaid. There are actually a lot of good tight ends that had heavy involvement today with a lot of targets. So you like that, and I think this could be, kind of interestingly, there were a lot of tight ends that gave you 10 points today. So that is a good stat line to see for you, is that a lot of guys didn't really let you down necessarily. There are some options, though, out there. And one of the most interesting situations to me is Harold Fannin Jr., who was a top 6 tight end on the week. He was out-targeted. He received more targets than David Njoku in this particular game. I believe Njoku had 6 targets, and Fannin Jr. had 9 targets, 7 for 63. And he did have a drop, so that game he could have even had more. So this is an interesting situation to monitor moving forward. I don't really necessarily love second tight ends on a team, but when he is already getting more targets than Njoku, it is kind of concerning to me for Njoku for one, and then 2, it gives me a lot of interest in what this guy could provide. Is he already gaining trust of the coaching staff? I wouldn't place a huge bid on him necessarily, but I do think of all the tight ends available, this is the one with the most intrigue, even more so than the number one tight end on the week, Juwan Johnson, because I do feel that Fannin Jr. as a rookie could get more involved as the season goes along. He was highly rated by a lot of people, so very well could be a situation where he could be the surprise rookie that does really well for you. Not as good as one rookie, though, that I will talk a little bit later on, for example. Juwan Johnson, number one tight end on the week. He got a lot of targets today. You really like to see that. I think, to me, he is probably the next best option that you can go with. He had 11 targets today, 8 for 76. I don't love the Saints offense, but if they're going to be giving him that many targets, and if you're in a deep league, you really can't really find a lot worse than this. This is a good backup option if you have Kittle or Bowers too. A good secondary stream option to consider in your lineup. Should they not play? I think this. He's let us down before, but there's not a lot of options on the Saints team with Olave being down, Johnson being the lead target share guy. He's definitely going to be in a lot of stream considerations for week 2. Other names that I've talked about that I've liked that are out there in a lot of leagues, Zach Ertz and Hunter Henry. Zach Ertz got the touchdown today. Hunter Henry got the targets. He got 8 targets for the Patriots. Should continue to remain heavily involved in New England. At least what he always does is he's like really good for like 3 games, and then he gives you a 0 for like the 4th. And it's like a cycle. Like every 3 weeks he's good, and 1 week he's terrible. So it's very hard to trust Hunter Henry for me personally. But I love that he's already getting 8 targets, even with the coaching staff change. I think that's great on his behalf. And how about this player? Kyle Pitts is now in pickup and potentially start on a stream for how he played today. He was a top 10 tight end on the week. He didn't get a touchdown, but he was heavily targeted. And, this is another situation where Drake London dealing with injuries. I talked about Ray McLeod already. Kyle Pitts could actually be the sneaky benefit factor of this. So shout out to him for actually having me say something positive about him for once, because I usually do not do that. He had 8 targets today, 7 for 59. Hopefully for the Kyle Pitt truthers, he's figuring it out. But that's why he's also going to show up on another list that I will talk about shortly. And then deep names to consider. Michael Mayer, Zach Tonjes are 2 guys that would be the direct handcuff for Bowers and Kittle should they not play in week 2. And then Noah Fant looked pretty good in Cincinnati as well. He got a touchdown. He was also pretty involved in targets too. I don't love that one because I do feel that ultimately he's probably the 5th option at best on that for Joe Burrow to look to in the receiving game. But still, he had a nice performance today in his first game in Cincinnati. Jake Ferguson is a drop to me. There are just too many other tight ends that did a little bit more for me than Jake Ferguson, and one that have more intrigue than him at this time that I would just want to I would want to see what like a Fannin Jr. or a Juwan Johnson could do versus Jake Ferguson personally. There are 3 tight ends that had concerning games, but I would hold them. And in this order of my concern for them, it's number 1, Mark Andrews, number 2, David Njoku, and 3, Evan Ingram. Andrews, that was an off game, but I do feel that this offense is just so explosive in Baltimore that Mark Andrews will have better performances moving forward, and I think that this will be a game where he will be pretty productive. David Njoku, I kind of messed up my words there, but Mark Andrews I think will have better games moving forward. Just kind of treat this game as a fluke and move on from it. Maybe you want to get another tight end just to cover yourself, but I would not be dropping Mark Andrews. David Njoku, I am concerned that Fannin Jr. is already getting more targets than him, and Njoku was pretty pedestrian today. I would not be cutting Njoku, but this situation is one that I'm definitely a lot more concerned about and going to be interested to see what happens in Baltimore next week. If they happen to have the same trend, then we might be sounding some fire alarms on Njoku especially for his long-term value. Evan Ingram had an injury today. I would still hold him because there is value in that offense and the potential it has, but not a great start to his Denver career. Who do you buy low on the tight ends? And, I mean, obviously Bowers, McBride, they didn't have the world-beating games necessarily today. Obviously, if you can get them, that would be great. But since they both did pretty well today, relative to the majority of the tight end landscape, you're probably not going to get them. The number one guy that I would be trying to buy, and this guy I've been high on all offseason, is Tyler Warren, rookie tight end for the Colts. Coming out right away, number 3 tight end on the week. Tyler Warren, in this particular game, let's just look at his numbers real quick. He was 7 for 76, had 9 targets. He also had a carry. That's crazy production for a rookie to have in week 1, and I think it's right up there with Bowers with what he did. So Warren, I had him at top 10 in my rankings. I think I had him number 8 overall or number 7, somewhere over there. But this is just looking great for the Warren managers. It's going to be really hard to get him, but I think if you can flip certain names, you might be able to get it done. And I think this is the guy that I would be trying to target who is most realistic. Try to get him before people have a sample size and really know how talented this young rookie is. And then Dallas Goedert is kind of a sneaky buy low, in my opinion, because he didn't have a great game necessarily by the numbers, 7 for 44, but he had 7 targets in that Eagles system. And hopefully they could figure out ways to kind of get him more involved like that. He's been inconsistent in his career, but the fact that you get 7 targets out of a guy that people may have and may be willing to part with, I think that's a risk worth taking, especially if you're looking for if you're looking for a short-term fill-in, for example, or second tight end at worst. I think that's a solid option to look at. Who are the names that you could sell? Biggest one to me is Travis Kelce. As I mentioned in the live video on Sunday, he just didn't really look very effective in that game. He did have a long 37-yard touchdown that really kind of saved his day. But if you take that away, then you're looking at him in that same category with Andrews and Njoku as a concern. I think it would be best to try to use the name of Travis Kelce, and this sounds crazy, but I do think there are people that would actually want to go Travis Kelce over Tyler Warren just because they're casuals and don't really understand fantasy football very well. I think that would be the move I would be trying to make if you have Travis Kelce, is trying to get Tyler Warren and sub out the legendary Chiefs tight end. Other names that you could try to sell that don't have as much value, though, Tucker Kraft got a touchdown today. I believe that was his only reception, though. And that's the thing with him, is that there's so many mouths to feed in that offense, once again with Green Bay, that it's just, I would just try to go somewhere else than Tucker Kraft. It was a lot of capital to draft him, especially in ESPN. I just don't really understand the appeal there. Dalton Kincaid, I misspoke a little bit. He was actually a top 5 tight end on the week. But Buffalo, I think the best target that they have is Keon Coleman moving forward. And Kincaid, I think, will give you some disappointing games to kind of balance out a pretty good one to start the season. I'd be trying to flip him. And then Kyle Pitts, just on the principle that they're Kyle Pitts truthers that they think the world of this guy, and you want to find them and try to trade Kyle Pitts to them because this is the best opportunity that he has right now, probably the highest I think his stock could be, maybe in his career. I'd never root against the guy's career to somebody to do well, but I'm just being realistic that I think this is a good chance to try to sell Kyle Pitts, because we've seen this game so many times with him over the last 4 years where he builds up all this hope and all this hype and then he just lets you down. We will talk briefly defense and kicker, and then we'll close out this video for today. Good streams that I like for week 2. Baltimore might get dropped in certain leagues. They had a negative point performance against Buffalo. I warned you guys of that you shouldn't be trying to rely on Baltimore or Buffalo defense in week 1. But they get the Cleveland Browns in week 2. So Baltimore, if they were dropped, pick them right up for this week 2 and then play them against the Cleveland Browns. Arizona, a little bit disappointing today and by the numbers, but they got the Panthers next week. Bryce Young did not look great today. great stream for week 2. Other good ones I like, New England gets Miami, which is looking like they could be one of those teams that you just want to auto-start the defense against. Crazy when you consider where they were in 2023. And then San Francisco, who's also pretty widely available in ESPN formats, gets New Orleans and Spencer Rattler this next week. And then kicker, real quick. The number one kicker on this week, it was not somebody that was in a drafted top 12. Like I've been saying, it was Chad Ryland, undrafted kicker for the Arizona Cardinals with the number one performance on the week, only 1.5% rostered. And that goes back to my point that I make, and I've been making for years on this channel, about why you should devalue the kicker, not reach for a kicker early, just wait to take one either undrafted or the last round, because there's guys that you can get at the end. Like Joey Slye, top 4 kicker on the week. He was only 0.4% rostered. He had 15 points. Cam Little also had 15 points. This guy was, he's only 54% rostered. Boswell was really the one that, of the highly rostered guys, like gave you a top 5 performance. Everybody else was under 55% rostered among the top 5. That being said, it's just another reminder about why you should devalue the kicker. Use that spot for extra bench players in your flex, and then pick up a kicker at the end of the week, because you can get great performance out of these guys randomly, and I would just rather take the chance on the waiver wire with kickers and have extra bench pieces to use for trades or to cover myself in the event of injuries in my flex. All right, that's all that I've got for this video. Thank you for watching the Week 2 waiver wire preview and buy low and sell high candidates. We will come at you later this week with some more content to get you ready for Week 2. And if you have any questions, comment them below. I reply to all my commenters, so please take advantage of that. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.